Now, I've already given grades out to my competition events this year. Now I'm going to do it for competitions. And the first one up here is Unorthodox Blocks 2025. This one only had 2 events, but I got a PR on one of them. So somehow my PR streak didn't die here. And just because of that, I think I could give this a pretty decent grade. But because it doesn't have more PRs, I'm probably not going to give it super high or anything. I'm going to give it a C+ solely because of the 1 PR. Next up here, we have Naperville Winter 2025. And this was actually a pretty bad competition. Since there's a 3x3, I only had 2 rounds and only got 1 total sub 10, which for me is kind of bad. The only thing that can carry this competition is MaxKoMusic, because I got a PR single and PR average in the first round, and that PR single was pretty crazy. I went from a 121 to a 102, but that's the only reason that this competition is going to have a not failing letter grade. It is going to be a D+. If it weren't for MaxKoMusic, this might have been considered an F, who knows? Although I wouldn't say 7x7 was terrible here. After that, we had Skewb on the Madison Snow, which wasn't the craziest competition for 3x3. In fact, I didn't even get a sub 10 at all, but for other events, it was pretty crazy. For MaxKoMusic, I beat my previous PR single and got my first sub 1 in comp. For Clock, I got a 6.65 single. For 4x4, I got a PR average. There were a good amount of PRs here, and it was a pretty big competition, so I am going to give this a B+. Overall, I think it was a pretty exciting competition and had a lot of good stuff happen, so that's why I'm giving it this grade. Next competition was Racing Kane 2025, and I got an 8.76 PR single on my very first solve of this competition, so that's going to definitely boost the grade a bit. I also got a PR average for MaxKoMusic, but other than those 2 facts, that was not a very amazing competition, also considering I didn't really make it into many final rounds. So that is gonna lower down the grade a bit to a B-. It could have been better if I did have more PRs and more finals, but for now it's just going to stay there, and I wouldn't really complain. It's not my worst of the year. Next up here is Chicagoland Newcomers, and as you can imagine, I made it into a lot more finals than the previous one because it was mostly newcomers, so I could just make it into a good amount of finals. This competition was mainly centered around Skewb and one-handed. I got some pretty good Skewb times, and one-handed I made finals, but it wasn't my best times ever, so I'm not going to give it too much of an upgrade for that. So I think it ends up going at about B- as well, similar to the last one, just kind of the opposite style of competition. And then nearing the end of March, we had Il Illinois Spring 2025, and this was an amazing competition for 5x5 in which I got a PR average, which was sub 130, and that allowed me to compete at Worlds, and a 110 PR single, which still stands to this day. But other than the random 2x2 PR I got along with that, this was a pretty underwhelming competition. I didn't make it into many finals, and there were only 5 events, being all the N-by-Ns. So because the style of competition feels very similar to Unorthodox Blocks, I'm going to give it the same grade as it in C+. And to start off April, we had South Bend Scramble, and immediately on my first round, I got a 3x3 PR average of 9.75, which was my first ever sub 10 average in competition, so that is definitely going to play a big factor here. And I also got a blindfolded success of 233, but other than those 2 solves, it wasn't really a crazy competition. I did improve my PR average further in 5x5 down to a 125, but that was not crazy because I would prove to break that average a bunch later on. But the grade is still going to be relatively high because the PRs are there and they are pretty good, especially that 3x3 average. So I'm going to give it a B+ because I got a very good handful of solid PRs. Next up, we have Naperville Mini, another competition that is designed to ruin my PR streak. There were only 3 events, but I did manage to get a PR in MaxKoMusic, and I did get a blindfolded success, which was pretty rare, so I'm just going to add that into the contribution. Other than that, though, this competition was fairly unremarkable, and I'm not going to give it a super high grade, although it did keep my PR streak going, so that's cool. I'm just going to give it a C. And next up here, we have Land of Lincoln 2025. This one I went to the previous year for Land of Lincoln 2024, but the events were slightly different, and this competition is mainly good for Skewb and Pyraminx for me. I got a PR average for Pyraminx, which was sub 5, and that was pretty crazy. And then I got a solid Skewb average, but other than that, this was pretty unremarkable. I did make it into a few finals, but if you ask me to define the most average competition I've been to this year, it would literally be this one. And as for the grade, I'm going to give it a pretty average grade in B-. And next up here, we have Worlds, Rubik's WSA World Championship 2025, and obviously I didn't make it into any second rounds here. Maybe I could have made it into 3x3 if I got a pretty insane average, but it would have to be PR, so no, I don't think that was possible. But I did get 5 PRs and some pretty crazy square 1 times, so it wasn't a complete waste of a competition. Obviously, also I got to experience what it was like at Worlds. I also did a fair number of events. I was able to qualify for like 8 or so events, but overall wasn't the most crazy competition, and for that reason I'm going to give it a B. And next up we had Wisconsin M-by-N, which for 3x3 purposes was pretty good because I got an 8.69 single along with my second ever sub 10 average. For 4x4 was a pretty good competition. For 5x5 I broke my PR average again, and then for 6x6 I got a PR single, but overall I feel like it was kind of not the best, and same for 7x7. But overall there were a lot of good rounds in this competition, and so I'm going to give it the same grade as Worlds and B, because even though it had a lot less rounds than Worlds, it was about the same magnitude of PRs. Cubing USA Great Lakes Championships was about 2 weeks or so after that one, and because it had a lot of events, I knew I was going to get a fairly good amount of PRs. I didn't get a PR until like towards the end of the first day. But yeah, after that, PRs just started rolling in. I got a 7.05 3x3 single, a new PR single for 2x2, a new PR average for 5x5. I ended with probably roughly a similar amount of PRs in comparison to Worlds, but because I made it into a few more second rounds than Worlds, I'm going to give it a slightly better grade in B+. And then about 2 months later, we had our next competition in Wisconsin Championship 2025, and this one also had a very good number of events, so I also thought there was going to be at least some place where I PR. I got an insane one-handed time with a pretty good average to pair it with. I broke my 3x3 PR average in that same competition. I broke some pretty good 6x6 PRs, and other than that, there were a lot of other decent rounds that I had. So this competition is going to get an A grade. It was a very good one in terms of PRs, and especially considering I had competed in 2 months, this was definitely a very good competition to bring me back. Next up is Naperville Fall 2025, and this competition was basically a very complete competition for me. I made it into basically every single round of the competition, so that means I got a lot of solves, and that also means I got a decent amount of PRs. I think I got about the same amount as I did for Worlds in this competition. It might even be comparable to Wisconsin Championship, but I'm just going to give it a slightly lower grade in an A-. Don't get me wrong, the PRs at this competition are very insane. It's just Wisconsin Championships might be slightly better. My second to last competition of the year was Pyraminx in Pewaukee 2025, and this was a competition that went really well last year, so it was going to be interesting to see how it went this year. The main highlight here is a 2.39 Pyraminx single that I got pretty early on into the competition in the first round of Pyraminx, along with a few decent 3x3 averages, but other than that, this was not the craziest competition I've had this year, and probably not as crazy as the previous two I had been to. So for that reason, I'm going to give this one a B-. There was just not enough PRs for me to put it higher than this. And the final competition of the year is Machesney Park 2025, and in this one, I did get a pretty crazy Skewb double PR early on, along with some decent averages overall, but these decent averages weren't enough to get me into finals, and they also weren't enough for PRs, so I was kind of disappointed while I was going through that I was getting really close but not there. Overall, I think this is a better competition than Pyraminx in Pewaukee because the Skewb PRs are comparable to it, and I made around a similar number of rounds, I'd say. Also, I got a 401 7x7 single, which was absolutely crazy. So I'm going to give this one a B. It's a slightly better grade, but it is still a very common grade because I feel like a lot of competitions I did about roughly similar this year. But anyways, that is the end of this video. Hope you like me analyzing my competition solves, and let me know if you have any future ideas for me analyzing competition stuff, and I will see you in the next one.